Imagine a world where cities rose from desert soil. Kings reigned for 28,800 years, and writing was born just to count sheep. This is Mesopotamia, the first civilization. But from such brilliance came collapse. What happened to the world's first great cities? In this video, we'll trace the breathtaking arc of Mesopotamian civilization, from the mysterious Ubaid Period and the rise of Uruk, through the glory of Sargon's Akkadian Empire, to the fall of mighty Ur and the dawn of Babylon. You'll uncover how writing began with sheep and grain, how kings ruled by divine right, and how cities reached unimaginable heights before unraveling through invasion, drought, and civil strife. This isn't just ancient history. It's the story of how civilization began, thrived, and fell, and the echoes it left behind that still shape our world today. Before Uruk, before kings, before writing, there was Ubaid, a civilization that doesn't often make the headlines. But without it, history might have taken a different path. Around 5,900 BCE, in what is now southern Iraq, something remarkable happened. Small clusters of families began settling near the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. These weren't just camps. They were organized, permanent communities. For the first time, humans were choosing to stay put, to cultivate land, and to cooperate on an unprecedented scale. The Ubaid period gets its name from Tel al-Ubaid, a site where archaeologists uncovered the earliest evidence of this culture. But the influence of Ubaid society spread far beyond that mound. From the marshy delta to the desert fringes, people began building homes from mud brick, irrigating fields, and forming the first social hierarchies. This wasn't accidental. The shift to agriculture meant food surpluses. With more grain and livestock than any one family needed, some people could take on other roles: builders, artisans, priests, and perhaps even early administrators. This marked the birth of specialization, and with it, complexity. The settlements grew. Villages became towns. Streets were planned. Storage buildings and communal facilities appeared. And in the center of many of these growing towns were temples, raised platforms of mud brick that evolved into the precursors of ziggurats. These temples weren't just for worship. They were the engines of early governance. Inside, priests or temple officials organized the distribution of food, labor, and goods. They oversaw trade. They likely decided who worked which field and who got what share. This wasn't democracy. It was a theocracy in its earliest form, where divine authority justified social order. The Ubaid people traded extensively. Their painted pottery has been found all along the Persian Gulf, into Iran, and even toward the Arabian Peninsula. Without writing, how did they manage such long-distance commerce? We can only guess, but they did. Canoes and sailboats may have followed the coastlines, bringing back copper, stones, and exotic shells. The art of the Ubaid is subtle, but revealing. Their pottery features precise geometric designs in dark colors, suggesting aesthetic sensibility and perhaps even coded meanings. But the most intriguing finds are the clay figurines. Long heads, almond eyes, seated in positions of power or ritual. Some archaeologists suggest they represent priest kings or gods. Others think they were used in ceremonies of fertility, healing, or ancestral remembrance. Burial practices add to the mystery. Graves range from simple pits to elaborate tombs, some containing jewelry, tools, and offerings. This hints at a belief in the afterlife, or at least the importance of honoring the dead. It also signals social stratification. Some individuals clearly had more than others. But for all its accomplishments, the Ubaid period left us no texts, no epic poems, no tablets. What we know comes from layers of sediment, scattered tools, ruined foundations. Yet what we see points to a sophisticated society, one that governed, traded, and worshipped in a way that laid the blueprint for the Sumerians and beyond. One of the Ubaid period's most crucial legacies was irrigation. They dug canals, controlled river flows, and managed water over large areas. No small feat. This allowed them to support larger populations and maintain food production in an unforgiving environment. It also meant collaboration. You can't irrigate fields alone. You need neighbors. You need organization. And that's perhaps the most enduring lesson of Ubaid. That civilization begins not with grandeur, but with cooperation. Imagine these early people building dikes by hand, sketching out canals, storing seeds, crafting tools, decorating pottery by firelight. They may not have left us literature, but they left a framework. They showed that human beings could live in large, structured communities, not as hunter-gatherers, but as planners, builders, and organizers of the landscape. And when the Ubaid period ended around 4000 BCE, it didn't collapse. It transitioned. Its settlements didn't vanish. They evolved, morphing into larger towns that would become the first cities. Among them was Uruk, a name that would change the world. After the quiet ingenuity of the Ubaid period came a thunderous leap forward: Uruk. Around 4000 BCE, the land of Mesopotamia witnessed something the world had never seen before: a true city. Uruk wasn't just big. It was organized, vibrant, and utterly transformative. At its peak around 2900 BCE, it may have had up to 80,000 residents, making it the largest city in the world. Towering temples, bustling marketplaces, administrative centers. It had all the features of modern urban life, over 5,000 years ago. Located on the fertile floodplains of southern Sumer, modern-day Warka, Iraq, Uruk sat near a channel of the Euphrates River. While today it lies miles from the water, back then the river flowed directly past the city's walls, allowing for irrigation, transport, and trade. This river access helped Uruk flourish. Goods, ideas, and people moved in and out daily. And within its massive 6 square kilometer footprint, Uruk did something revolutionary. It standardized power, labor, and culture on an unprecedented scale. Temples dominated its skyline, the most famous being the White Temple, built atop a high platform, an early prototype of the ziggurat. These religious complexes weren't just for prayer, they were economic engines. Priests ran complex bureaucracies, collecting and redistributing grain, managing labor, and documenting transactions. And to track it all, Uruk gave the world its greatest invention: writing. Around 3500 BCE, scribes began etching pictographs into soft clay using a reed stylus. These evolved into cuneiform, wedge-shaped symbols that would become the writing system of Mesopotamia for over 3,000 years. It began simply, tracking goats, barley, beer. But soon it grew into a system capable of literature, law, and prophecy. The earliest texts from Uruk list hundreds of professions: brickmakers, butchers, singers, brewers. This standard professions list reveals a city with layers of society: elites, priests, scribes, artisans, laborers, and slaves. And these roles weren't just symbolic. Daily life in Uruk was intensely active. Artisans perfected their crafts: pottery, metallurgy, weaving. Traders haggled in open markets, often carrying goods imported from distant lands. Bureaucrats recorded every transaction, every offering, every bushel of barley owed in taxes. Religion remained central. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, became the patron deity of Uruk. Her temple, the Iana precinct, was the spiritual heart of the city. It was also politically powerful. Its priests controlled resources, staffed rituals, and wielded influence far beyond the sacred walls. In fact, temples and their managers became so powerful that the people of Uruk eventually sought balance. Warrior chiefs emerged, early kings who claimed divine favor but also offered military protection and civic leadership. Over time, kingship and priesthood became twin pillars of Mesopotamian power. This shift is reflected in architecture. While earlier buildings focused on religious function, Uruk began constructing palaces and fortifications. One of its most legendary kings, Gilgamesh, was said to have built the Great Walls of the city. The Sumerian king list even attributes 126 years to his reign, though myth and memory often blur. Gilgamesh, of course, is more than a king. He's the star of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving piece of literature. Composed in stages, the story features themes still resonant today: friendship, grief, mortality, the search for meaning. Whether or not Gilgamesh truly ruled, the myth reveals how deeply Uruk shaped the Mesopotamian imagination. The city's cultural output wasn't limited to stories. Music, sculpture, and rituals all flourished. Elaborate headdresses, ceremonial vessels, and carved stone plaques reflect a rich symbolic world. Life in Uruk was not all temples and tales. People lived in tightly packed neighborhoods, working as potters, weavers, smiths, and merchants. Farmers outside the city fed those within. Wool garments were common, woven from sheep raised nearby. The elite wore linen, rare and costly. Trade connected Uruk to the wider world. Goods from Anatolia, Iran, the Persian Gulf, and even the Indus Valley have been found at the site. Uruk wasn't just a city. It was a hub, part of a growing web of early globalization. With such prosperity came tension. More people meant more conflict over land, water, and resources. As city-states multiplied across Sumer, competition intensified. Warfare became a constant feature of life. City walls grew higher, soldiers more numerous. Yet despite conflict, culture flourished. By around 3000 BCE, Uruk was the model of civilization. It had the earliest monumental architecture in stone, the first known ziggurats, and the birth of personal seals, cylinder seals used to stamp documents and mark ownership. These small carved objects offer a window into daily life, religion, and even fashion. As Uruk expanded, it influenced nearby settlements. Its administrative practices, artistic styles, and temple layouts were copied across the region. Archaeologists speak of an Uruk expansion, where colonies or trading posts carried its culture far into northern Mesopotamia and beyond. But this golden age wasn't permanent. As other cities grew stronger, like Kish, Lagash, and Uruk's dominance faded. Power became more decentralized. By the early Dynastic period, starting around 2900 BCE, Uruk was still important, but no longer the uncontested heart of Sumer. Still, its legacy endured. The first city, the first writing, the first literature, all from Uruk. In many ways, the Mesopotamian story begins here, with clay tablets, temple towers, and a king who sought eternal life. By 2900 BCE, the world of Uruk had fractured into a mosaic of rival city-states. Mesopotamia had entered a new phase, one marked not just by growth, but by power struggles. This was the early Dynastic period, a time when myth began merging with history, and kingship became the cornerstone of civilization. Sumer was now a checkerboard of cities: Lagash, Kish, Nippur, Umma, Eridu. Each was fiercely independent, with its own deity, dialect, and identity. Yet all shared a deep cultural unity. They wrote in cuneiform, built step temples, and viewed kingship as a divine institution. The Sumerian king list tells us that kingship descended from heaven, a gift from the gods. And while the early entries list impossibly long reigns, Ululim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. They reflect a worldview where time, divinity, and kingship were inseparable. One of the first rulers to bridge myth and reality is Etana of Kish. According to legend, he flew to the heavens on an eagle's back to retrieve the plant of birth and restore fertility to his land. While there's no firm evidence he existed, his story shows the blending of politics, religion, and myth in Sumerian kingship. And myth played a central role during this period, especially the story of a catastrophic flood. Around 2900 BCE, geological evidence suggests a massive river flood swept across the southern Mesopotamian plain. This natural disaster likely inspired the flood legends in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Eridu Genesis, and the Atrahasis. In each version, humanity is nearly wiped out, saved only by a lone survivor warned by the gods. The flood narrative wasn't just a story. It was a cultural memory. It reinforced the idea that the gods could destroy civilization at will, and that survival depended on humility, piety, and wisdom. After the flood, Sumer rose again, stronger, more competitive, and more complex. Temples expanded, laws were codified, cities jockeyed for supremacy, trade boomed. Society was now structured around a household model. Temples, palaces, and even large estates operated like businesses, managing labor, land, and production. Workers were paid in rations, measured portions of barley, oil, beer. Scribes tracked everything on clay tablets, creating the earliest known bureaucracies. Labor was gendered and hierarchical. Men farmed, herded, or fought. Women, especially in temple households, spun thread, wove cloth, or ground grain. Children worked too, especially in lower-class families. The city was a web of obligations and interdependence. As cities grew in wealth, they also grew in ambition. The first recorded war in history dates to this period. Around 2700 BCE, Enmebaragesi of Kish led a military campaign against Elam, bringing back spoils and enslaved captives. This war marked the beginning of organized state conflict. Warfare became common. City-states vied for water rights, farmland, and religious prestige. Battles were fought not just with spears and chariots, but with political maneuvering and economic pressure. Lagash emerged as a major power under Ur-Nanshe and his son Eannatum. Around 2500 BCE, Eannatum expanded Lagash's territory dramatically, conquering the rival city of Umma and securing trade routes and fertile lands. His triumphs are etched into the Stele of the Vultures, a haunting monument showing rows of slain soldiers in divine vengeance. The Stele was more than art. It was propaganda. It portrayed Eannatum not only as a warrior, but as a servant of the gods, executing divine justice. This blending of kingship and theology became standard. Yet empires built on war were fragile. After Eannatum's death, Lagash fragmented. Revolts broke out. Umma retaliated. The balance of power shifted again. Around this time, a singular name appears on the Sumerian king list, Kubaba of Kish. The only woman to appear on the list, she was said to be a tavern keeper who became queen. While her historical footprint is debated, her presence in the records is remarkable, and her legend endured. Later, cultures deified her as a goddess of statecraft and protection. Kubaba's rise shows that while rare, women could, and did, hold power in early Mesopotamia. In temples, elite women served as priestesses. Some managed estates or held religious offices. Their influence was real, if often hidden from the clay tablets. As the early dynastic period wore on, cities like Uruk, Kish, and Nippur maintained cultural dominance, but none could fully unify the region. Alliances were formed and broken. Fortifications rose. Spears and cuneiform alike shaped the political landscape. Despite the violence, intellectual life thrived. Scribes in Adubas, scribal schools, copied myths, hymns, and legal codes. The Epic of Gilgamesh took on new forms, expanding in length and depth. The gods were formalized into a pantheon: Enlil, Anu, Enki, Inanna,
each with domains and temples across cities. Innovation surged. The potter's wheel made ceramics faster and cheaper. Metalworkers learned to alloy copper with tin, ushering in the Bronze Age. Plows and canals improved farming yields. Cities began building standardized weights and measures, facilitating long-distance trade. Goods poured in from distant lands: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia. In return, Mesopotamians exported textiles, grain, pottery, and culture. Trade wasn't just economic. It spread ideas, art, and gods. But beneath the cultural flowering, cracks were forming. City-states remained divided. None could rise above the rest. Mesopotamia was rich but unstable. And that's when a new power rose. Not from Sumer, but from the north. Akkad. There, a man of unknown birth would claim kingship not from the gods of one city, but over all cities. A man named Sargon, a gardener's son, a cupbearer turned conqueror. His name would become synonymous with empire, and his story would mark the end of the early dynastic age and the beginning of a new chapter in human history.
Around 2334 BCE, the ancient world witnessed something entirely new. For centuries, the cities of Sumer had existed in a delicate balance of rivalry and ritual. But then came a man who broke that balance. A man who built something greater. His name was Sargon of Akkad. According to legend, he was born in secret, placed in a basket on a river, and rescued by a gardener. He rose from humble beginnings to become the cupbearer to the king of Kish. But ambition burned within him. He overthrew his master and began a campaign of conquest that would transform Mesopotamia and human history. Sargon founded a new city, Agade. Its location is still unknown today, but in its time, it was a bustling imperial capital. From Agade, he led an army that swept across Sumer. Kish, Uruk, Lagash, Umma, all fell to his might, but Sargon didn't stop. He pushed beyond Sumer, into Elam to the east, Syria and the Levant to the west, and perhaps even toward Anatolia. For the first time in history, a single government ruled over diverse languages, landscapes, and cultures. This was the Akkadian Empire, the first true empire in recorded history. Sargon called himself King of the Four Quarters, a title that claimed rule over the entire world. He wasn't just king of a city, he was king of kings. To secure this authority, he restructured governance. He placed Akkadian governors, or Ensi, in Sumerian cities to ensure loyalty. These officials collected taxes, oversaw temples, and maintained public order. To unify such a vast realm, Sargon promoted a shared language, Akkadian. Though Sumerian remained in religious and literary use, Akkadian became the language of administration and diplomacy. It was written in cuneiform, adapted from the Sumerian system, and became the script of empire. Sargon also organized a standing army, disciplined, mobile, and well-equipped. They wore bronze helmets, carried composite bows, and used tactics honed through years of war. These soldiers built roads, maintained canals, and acted as police. Military service became a tool of state control. But Sargon's genius wasn't just military. It was symbolic. He aligned himself with the goddess Ishtar, the Akkadian version of Inanna, portraying himself as her favored servant. Temples to Ishtar were erected across the empire. Ritual and propaganda merged as statues of Sargon were placed in conquered cities. One inscription boasts, "I ruled the black-headed people. I made love dwell in every city. I governed from the upper sea to the lower sea." This wasn't just conquest. It was order imposed through divinity. Yet, empire brought resistance. Sumerian cities bristled under Akkadian control. Rebellions flared in the south. Sargon crushed them, often brutally, but unrest simmered. A tablet from his reign states, "In his old age, all the lands revolted against him, but he subdued them and destroyed their armies." Sargon reigned for 56 years. Upon his death, The throne passed to his son Rimush, who quickly faced uprisings. Rimush ruled with iron force but was assassinated. His brother Manishtushu succeeded him, continuing campaigns abroad but also facing internal dissent. Then came Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, the most famous Akkadian ruler of all. Naram-Sin declared himself a living god, the first Mesopotamian ruler to do so. His divine title, God of Akkad, was unprecedented. He wore the horned helmet, a symbol reserved for deities, and demanded temples in his name. His arrogance scandalized traditional priests, but his reign brought glory. He expanded the empire further, defeating the Lullaby mountain tribes in the northeast and securing trade with distant lands. His empire stretched from the Zagros to the Mediterranean. The victory stele of Naram-Sin, one of Mesopotamia's most famous artifacts, shows him ascending a mountain in triumph, trampling enemies underfoot as he gazes toward the heavens. It's both art and ideology, a depiction of divine kingship at its peak. Culturally, the Akkadian period saw a golden age. Literature flourished. Scribes recorded laws, hymns, epics, and scientific texts. The fusion of Sumerian and Akkadian religious traditions enriched theology. Deities were reinterpreted, and temple rituals became more elaborate. Economically, Akkad became a cosmopolitan center. Merchants traded goods from distant regions: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, tin from Anatolia. Standardized weights and measurements facilitated commerce. Agricultural reforms boosted productivity. The empire was a machine of extraction and redistribution. Yet cracks began to show. The empire's size made communication difficult. Regional governors gained power. Tribute demands strained rural communities. Droughts hit the agricultural heartland, leading to famines. As conditions worsened, rebellions resumed. The Gutians, a mysterious people from the Zagros Mountains, took advantage of the chaos. Around 2190 BCE, they swept into Akkad, sacked Agade, and shattered central authority. The fall was catastrophic. Temples looted, bureaucracies collapsed, trade routes severed. Sumerian laments blamed the gods. One tablet mourns. The people of Akkad were washed away like a flood. The statues of the gods were covered in dust. For generations, the Gutians ruled parts of Mesopotamia, but they lacked the organization and vision of the Akkadians. The empire dissolved into a patchwork of struggling cities and broken alliances. But Sargon's dream didn't die. The idea of empire, the dream of one king uniting many, endured. Later rulers, from Babylon to Assyria, invoked Sargon's name. They copied his titles, claimed his bloodline, and rebuilt the temples he once patronized. In a sense, Sargon ruled long after his death, not in power, but in memory. The Akkadian Empire proved what was possible, that with vision, discipline, and divine legitimacy, human society could scale beyond city-states. It was a test of how far civilization could go, and a warning of what happens when it stretches too far. The fall of the Akkadian Empire was not the end of civilization. It was a pause. In the shadow of collapse, Mesopotamia entered what many considered a dark age. Yet even amid decline, seeds of rebirth were already taking root in the southern city of Uruk. After the Gutians sacked Agade and disrupted central rule, chaos spread across Mesopotamia. Trade halted, temples decayed, cuneiform texts began speaking of famine, rebellion, and the loss of divine favor. The once thriving cities of the Akkadian Empire became isolated islands. For nearly a century, the Gutians ruled as fragmented overlords, unable to replicate the Akkadian state. They lacked central bureaucracy, urban planning, or a shared cultural vision. Even contemporary texts from Lagash mocked them as uncultured and ignorant of proper rituals. Yet quietly, in the city of Uruk, a resurgence began. A local ruler named Utu Hegal
claimed divine backing and launched a revolt. Around 2112 BCE, he defeated the Gutians in battle and declared the end of their reign. Though his dynasty was short-lived, his victory cleared the way for something greater. Enter Ur-Nammu. A governor of Ur under Utu-Hegal, Ur-Nammu seized the moment. He declared independence and founded the third dynasty of Ur, what we now call the Neo-Sumerian Empire. His reign marks the beginning of one of the most sophisticated and culturally rich periods in Mesopotamian history. Ur-Nammu wasn't just a warrior. He was a builder, a lawgiver, and a visionary. He revived Sumerian traditions while integrating lessons from the Akkadians. His most enduring achievement? The Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest surviving law code in the world, predating Hammurabi by centuries. Written in Sumerian cuneiform, it includes laws on theft, adultery, murder, and false accusations. The code reflects a more proportional form of justice than later Babylonian law, emphasizing fines over physical punishment in many cases. Ur-Nammu also redefined the landscape. He initiated an ambitious building campaign across Sumer. The great ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god, Nana, rose above the plains. A massive terraced temple that still stands today as one of the most iconic monuments of Mesopotamia. This was more than architecture. It was ideology in stone. The ziggurat symbolized order, hierarchy, and divine connection. It proclaimed, "The gods have returned. Civilization is restored." Ur-Nammu's son and successor, Shulgi, elevated the empire to new heights. A patron of the arts, literature, and religion, he reformed the bureaucracy and expanded infrastructure. Roads were improved, taxes standardized, and records meticulously kept by a growing class of scribes. Shulgi also reorganized temple economies. Each temple became a state-run institution managing workers, land, animals, and produce. Centralized control allowed for greater efficiency, but required constant oversight. The state grew more powerful and more involved in daily life. Shulgi declared himself divine during his lifetime, following Naram Sin's controversial precedent. He claimed to be the equal of kings and gods alike, an administrator, warrior, and high priest. In royal hymns he boasts, "I am the light of Sumer. I alone bring truth and judgment." Education became a state priority. Scribes were trained in vast schools, copying texts from earlier eras, preserving myths, and refining legal formulas. It's during this period that the Sumerian literary canon was codified. Stories like Gilgamesh, Enmerkar, and the Lord of Arata, and temple hymns were standardized for future generations. Under the Third Dynasty, Sumerian culture experienced a renaissance. Art returned to idealized forms, showing divine kings, orderly rituals, and symmetrical designs. Cylinder seals and stelae became tools of propaganda. Temples served not just as places of worship, but as political and economic centers. But as always, prosperity invited strain. As the empire expanded into Elam and northern Mesopotamia, it relied on massive labor forces, some local, some enslaved. Grain surpluses became harder to manage, climate stress returned, and the cost of defending long frontiers began to outweigh the benefits. Shulgi's successors lacked his charisma and skill. One by one, cities began breaking away. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people from the west, settled in urban centers. Elamite invasions chipped away at eastern borders. Around 2004 BCE, the Elamites sacked Ur, looted its temples, and took the last king, Ibisin, into captivity. The Neo-Sumerian Empire was no more, yet its legacy was profound. It had reasserted the power of writing, centralized administration, and religious ideology after an age of fragmentation. It preserved Sumerian culture at its peak, even as Sumerian would soon fade as a spoken language. It reestablished the idea that order could follow collapse, and that empires could rise again from the ashes.
The cities of Sumer would never again lead the world, but they had passed the torch of civilization, north to Babylon.
With the fall of Ur in 2004 BCE, the last great Sumerian empire crumbled into memory. But Mesopotamia was far from done. From its fractured city-states emerged a new power, one that would redefine law, kingship, and myth for generations. This was Babylon. In the power vacuum left by Ur's collapse, Mesopotamia splintered again. Amorite chieftains, once seen as outsiders, now rose to power in cities like Isin, Larsa, and Babylon. These were turbulent times, with shifting alliances and competing dynasties. But amid the chaos, one city began to rise above the rest. Babylon was originally a small, unremarkable town on the Euphrates. But under Hammurabi, who came to power around 1792 BCE, it became a force of nature. Hammurabi was a master strategist. First, he allied with stronger neighbors. Then, one by one, he turned against them. He conquered Larsa, Eshnunna, and Mari. By the end of his reign, Babylon ruled all of southern and central Mesopotamia. But Hammurabi's legacy wasn't just conquest. It was law. Around 1754 BCE, he issued the Code of Hammurabi, a comprehensive set of laws inscribed on a massive black basalt stele. It was the first time law had been so publicly declared, visible for all to see, etched beneath a carving of Hammurabi receiving authority from Shamash, the god of justice. The code covered theft, marriage, slavery, contracts, injury, and punishment. Its most famous phrase, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Justice was harsh, but also structured. It reflected a vision of ordered society and royal power as the guarantor of fairness. Hammurabi wasn't just a lawgiver. He expanded irrigation, built temples, and patronized the arts. He promoted the Akkadian language and continued Mesopotamia's tradition of bureaucratic record-keeping and literary preservation. Yet, after his death, Babylon faltered. His successors were weaker. Hittites sacked the city around 1595 BCE. Kassites followed, ruling Babylon for centuries. The Sumerian language faded completely, surviving only in religious texts. But the cultural framework remained. Even as empires changed, Babylon endured, growing in power, prestige, and legend. It would become the heart of Mesopotamia, again under Nebuchadnezzar. Centuries later, it would birth the Hanging Gardens, host the Tower of Babel, and house temples to gods who had once ruled from Eridu and Uruk. In many ways, Babylon was Mesopotamia's final word. Its kings inherited the legacies of Sargon, Ur-Nammu, and Hammurabi. Its scribes copied the Epic of Gilgamesh. Its priests tended temples first built in the time of the Ubaid. And its myths, laws, and ideas traveled with Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and beyond. When Babylon finally fell to Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE, it was the end of an era, but not the end of the story. Mesopotamia gave the world writing, law, kingship, and the city itself. It showed how humans could organize, create, and reach for the divine, even in mud brick and drought. And though its cities have crumbled, its spirit endures, etched in clay, carved in stone, and pulsing through the foundations of our own civilizations. From mud brick villages to world-spanning empires, the story of Mesopotamia is the story of us. It's the first draft of civilization, full of brilliance, struggle, and rebirth. The echoes of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon still shape how we live, govern, and believe today. If this journey through the world's first civilization sparked your imagination, hit that like button to support the channel, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the roots of humanity. Drop a comment with your favorite moment from Mesopotamian history, and let's keep the story alive together.